Shalom. Today is November 13th, and it is 5:35 p.m. here in Israel, about 10:30 in the morning in America on the Eastern Coast. It is the 38th day of the war. Let's get started with some very good news. We have we're really doing very well in this war, and doing well means that we are conquering our enemy. Let's keep in mind we have an enemy. The enemy is evil. This is not like a small dispute that can be carried out over a negotiating table, or I don't know, calmer heads will prevail. This is an evil enemy that has conducted acts of evil and promised to conduct more acts of evil. It is our responsibility to not only secure our homeland, secure our people, but to eliminate the enemy from the face of the earth to ensure that it does not do this. It is not our responsibility to build a wall to keep them away. It's not our responsibility to make them happy and try to appease them so that they don't attack us. It is our responsibility to wipe them off the face of the earth, and that is what we will do. Okay, and in that effort, in two different battles, in one battle, we killed 150 members of Hamas. I doubt that is an exact number, but 150 combatants on their side, terrorists, were killed. And in another overarching, included in that number of 150, but also some outside the 150 number, we have taken out in the last couple of days over 20 leaders of Hamas. This is destroying their infrastructure, destroying the way that they conduct their business in terms of trying to kill us, and we are weakening them. We are weakening their infrastructure. We're weakening their systems, and this brings us closer to victory, brings us closer to security, brings the end of the war closer. Up north, we have our hits on Hezbollah are going well. It is getting very hot up north. It is getting there's a lot of action happening up north. Instead of waiting, which we were doing the first couple of weeks, for Hezbollah terrorists to come and try to infiltrate the border or attack us, and then us playing defense and then hitting tit for tat, we have now started going on the offense against Hezbollah. We have started hitting sites inside of Syria, inside of Lebanon, not just sites along the border of Israel, but hitting closer to their sites. So that is a strategic difference of mass proportions and we are doing so well. Yesterday I mentioned the Russian air defense systems, which should operate as soon as Israeli jets cross into Syrian airspace. Not only are they not operating, but Israel's F-35S, the newest fighter jets that we have received from America, with Israeli inventions put onto it to make it even more stealth operated so that they can't be detected. Israel is hitting sites in Syria so fast and so quickly and without being detected that the air defense systems around Damascus, Syria's capital, which is the most heavily guarded area around Damascus, aren't even operating. In other words, what should happen is, as a plane starts sweeping in, the air defense systems picks up the fact that there's a plane coming in and starts firing. A lot of times it'll pick up, but it won't be able to fire, or it won't be able to find its target. Here, it's not even turning on, meaning the plane blows up its target, hits its target, flies out, and is undetected other than the mass chaos and explosion that it has left. This is an incredible achievement, a tremendous accomplishment. It is the most perfect way any air operation could be had, and it's not even something that is aimed for, because it's too unrealistic to assume that you could get in and out of a country that has a sophisticated air defense system without alerting it to your presence, and yet Israel is having that accomplishment. Okay, the good news on a political front is that it is becoming apparently clear to the entire world that Hamas and the Palestinian terrorists have absolutely zero standards. They have no problem lying to get what they want, which we saw when they crossed into the border into Egypt and made a deal that the sick and dying of and injured of Palestinian civilians would be allowed to cross into Egypt, and they lied, and a third of those people were members of Hamas. Straight lie. No idea of being honest or being fair or sticking to the rules. Now it's becoming clear that not only does Hamas have bunkers and have headquarters under hospitals and tunnels built into schools. Not only is that being clear, but now we have video of Hamas members firing upon soldiers, Israeli soldiers from the hospital. This is on video today. Not only that, but we are now seeing that Israel has offered to give fuel to the hospitals who are out of fuel to run their generators. And Hamas has said, no, we don't want the fuel. Israeli soldiers then clandestinely, secretly delivered fuel to the hospital. And then members of Hamas stole the fuel before the hospital could get it. It's becoming clear, abundantly clear to everybody, that Hamas is a special type of evil. When I use special, it's not in a good way. A special type of evil that has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And it is in everybody's interest that they be wiped off the face of the earth. Primarily, not just Israel's responsibility, but primarily it's to the benefit of the Palestinians themselves that Hamas be wiped out. And the very best thing that could happen for the Palestinians is not dropping humanitarian aid, is not the stopping of the bombing, but is actually the ridding of the world of Hamas and these Palestinian terrorists who consistently put themselves before their own people. And where do we see that the world is recognizing this? The EU today came out with an official statement slamming Hamas for these types of actions. Okay. In bad news, unfortunately, 2 more soldiers have been killed, bringing the total since the start of the ground operation to 44. Each one of these soldiers is a treasured member of the Jewish people, and each one of their passings is difficult for us to handle. There are still tunnels that go from Hamas-controlled Gaza into Egypt. I had previously thought that these tunnels had already been destroyed and it would be impossible for Hamas to resupply itself. Found out today that those tunnels are still around and they are still trying to resupply themselves through those tunnels. That has to be stopped. One of the key strategies of Israel's war is to make sure that Hamas cannot resupply itself. That's why we cut off the north from the south. So most of Hamas's fighters are in the north, and that's still true that they can't get supplies in the south. The Egyptian border is in the south, but whatever leftover Hamas members and terrorists are in the south would be able to be resupplied from those tunnels. Okay, and as we mentioned, Hamas unfortunately blocked fuel delivery to the hospitals, putting the Palestinian patients in danger, and that's on Hamas's head. Okay, UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Work Association. It is an organization set up to deal with Palestinian refugees 70 years ago. Every other refugee in the world for the past 70 years, since the start of the United Nations, 80 years, has been dealt with by the United Nations overall refugee organization. The Palestinians have their own special United Nations organization. It is clear to anyone who is honest that the reason why the Palestinians have this organization is not to help the refugees, but to perpetuate the problem of refugees. It's why 70 years later, there are still refugee camps, Palestinian refugee camps, which makes no sense because you don't have refugee camps in Vietnam. You don't have refugee camps in Korea. You don't have refugee camps in any other battleground state. You do not have this because the world solves the problem within a couple of years. It repatriates the people that were displaced from the war and creates houses for them and gets them on with their lives. The goal of UNRWA is not to solve the refugee problem, it's to perpetuate the refugee problem so that Israel can always be vilified by the fact that there are Palestinian refugees. And those refugees, first of all, the actual refugees are almost all dead. The refugee problem started 75 years ago. So the youngest a person could be today that was a refugee is 76 years old. You can obviously do the math and realize that every other refugee, no matter how many refugees you want to say there were, are dead. Right? They've passed away since then. That's just a fact. So the idea that Rashida Tlaib, who's a fourth generation from when the actual 1948 events occurred that created a refugee crisis among the Palestinian people, that she could consider herself a refugee 4 generations later is absurd, absolutely absurd, and that she would consider her own children refugees when she's a sitting member of Congress living in Detroit, Michigan. It's not what a refugee is. So that's absurd. So UNRWA claims that all fuel in Gaza that there is going to run out in the next 48 hours. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, UNRWA has been complicit in Hamas's power take over the Gaza Strip and has supported it. It continues to spread anti-Semitic teachings in its schools, which perpetuates this problem of people willing to become terrorists. Instead of teaching the Arab children that they should be peace-minded, instead they're doing the exact opposite, which is and therefore we have this perpetual problem of terrorists attacking Israel. These Palestinian terrorists that attacked on October 7th, they have no idea they didn't experience being a refugee. They were under 30 years old, under 40 years old. How in the world would they understand this if they're not taught this by UNRWA? Instead of UNRWA teaching this, they should be teaching how to move forward. So they're complicit. Number two, there's plenty of fuel in Gaza. We all know there's plenty of fuel in Gaza. Hamas has said it has plenty of fuel, and we have the pictures to show how much fuel they have. If Gaza runs out of fuel, that is on Hamas's head. All they have to do is turn over their fuel to their own people. Okay. The plans of what Hamas was actually trying to accomplish on October 7th is starting to come out now. Come out in the media. It's been we're starting to piece together all the intelligence, and it seems that Hamas's main goal was to try to get all the way across Israel to Judea and Samaria, to what the world calls the West Bank, and link up with terrorists there and create a massive war throughout all of Israel. October 7th is a horrible tragedy, but with a little thought, we can all realize that it was planned on being much worse, and we can all be grateful that it wasn't much worse than what happened. This could have been a much bigger disaster that could have taken tens of thousands of lives, and we're grateful that it didn't. Bibi has opened the door for negotiations. They said that, and we all know that there are negotiations going on behind the scenes. That's obvious. We've seen that Israeli planes have been on the ground in Egypt, and we know that discussions are ongoing with Qatar. But we don't know. We'll never know. The public will never be informed about what's going on, nor should it be. These are secret negotiations, and they'll only work if they're kept confidential. Today in the Knesset, there were emotional scenes. Families of the hostages testified in front of the Knesset at committee hearings, and were severely critical of those in Israel who are calling for the destruction of Gaza. The way the hostage families see it, that any destruction of Gaza would by definition take their families' lives. The hostages will also die, and that Israel's number one priority should be the return of hostages. It should not be destroying Gaza. And this is it's a controversial viewpoint, and I don't believe that most Israelis would agree with the families. I think most Israelis are sympathetic to the families. They feel bad for the families. They obviously want the hostages returned, but I think that everybody understands. Again, this is maybe it's just my opinion, but I don't think so. I think this is probably the widespread opinion that everybody understands that the number one thing that has to happen here is that we can never have a repeat of October 7th. And no one wants to say that even at the expense of the hostages' lives, but our priority has to be the ending of Hamas, not the return of the hostages. And that way, the rest of Israel can go on living safely and securely. Okay, that's all I have for the update. Let's get to questions. First question is, how long will the war last? Nobody knows. They said that soldiers should be prepared to be on reserve duty until January, which is a pretty long time. That's another 6 weeks, 6 weeks until that. Is there any news update on if Hezbollah is going to get involved in the war and also attack? So we mentioned earlier in the update that Hezbollah is stepping up its attacks, but being very unsuccessful, and Israel stepping up its attacks on Hezbollah. How high is the concern in Israel that Gaza war will get Iran covered to build an atomic weapon? No, Israel can chew gum and walk at the same time. And we're watching like hawks to see if Iran's going to build a nuclear weapon. And if they do, Israel will bomb Iran. That is no question. And America would bomb Iran as well. If Hezbollah manages to get involved with the war, hopefully not, will the U.S. also join in, so it's no longer simply a war between Gaza and Israel? I think that if Hezbollah decides to get in, I think America will get involved. Those aircraft carriers are there for a reason, and they're there to prevent Hezbollah from getting into the war. So if Hezbollah does decide to get into the war, then those aircraft carriers will take effect, and they'll start bombing Hezbollah. Will the U.S. ever send troops to Israel to help the IDF end the war? What will be the tipping point to make the U.S. fully get involved in the war? So the entire point of Israel was that Israel no longer be dependent on anybody else for its own safety and security. That is the entire point of Zionism, entire point that we be self-dependent. We determine our own future, and we don't rely on anybody else. We never have, and I hope to God never will, but it's definitely the ethos of Israel is not to have other countries fight for us. We never have done that. We've never asked American soldiers to fight for us or any other country for that matter. And therefore, we would not ask American soldiers to get involved. How has Iran's successful use of advanced defense systems impacted the regional dynamics in the ongoing conflict? So I don't think it has. I think that Israel has developed the sophisticated air force that can, and with the F-35 and the F-35S, that it can get past these sophisticated defense systems that Iran created. I think that Israel's been able to beat them. How do you see life after the war in Israel? It's a great question. Hopefully a lot more secure. I hope a lot more secure. And I hope with a whole different approach to how we handle Palestinians. Whether they be Palestinians in Gaza or Palestinians here in Judea and Samaria, I think we need to really rethink our relationship with them. I think that this can't just be, we've seen them do things to us, and it's not just terrorist organizations. Let's not fool ourselves. These were average Palestinians. Some were members of terrorist organizations, some were not. Some took advantage of the opportunity. And truth be told, I'm not sure how we could simply just ignore the fact that average Palestinians came in and raped, kidnapped, beheaded children. Yeah, raped children. So I don't know how we could just simply ignore that and assume that everything will be fine the next day. So I think we have to rethink a lot of our relationships, but hopefully life after the war is a much more secure life. Who has better technology in this war, Israel or Iran? Israel does. I know Iran isn't in the war, but they're anywhere near the technology of the IDF. No, we have much greater technology than Iran, and it is much better, much better than Iran's technology. Israel is one of the most sophisticated armies in the world. Okay, what are the Israelis doing with the drones that are flying over them to figure out where Israeli positions are? We're trying to destroy the drones, trying to detect them, and then trying to destroy them. Why did Israel take this long to stop these missiles? Couldn't Israel use these weapon systems earlier in the war? How did Iran find out about the technological advances that Israel has? Well, no, it's not that Israel took a long time to stop. You can't stop the missiles until they're fired. So we couldn't stop missiles. There haven't been missiles that have been landing successfully and killing Israelis. We waited to destroy them until they were fired at us. So, yeah. How did Israel destroy the highway? Do they bomb it, or do they do it in a safer, more organized manner for the children? There's no children on these highways. This is a supply highway between Iraq and Syria. So I don't know what Israel does through intelligence to make sure that there are no innocent people on the highway, but I'm pretty sure they're attacking when the convoys are there and they're hitting the convoys. Okay. For the technology that had never been used before this war, was it used now because it was ready to be used? Or would it have gone through more low-risk testing if not for the urgency and need for the weapons? No, so it's a great question. I'm very impressed by it. These weapon systems are ready, and that's why we're using them. We don't use weapon systems that are not ready because who knows what's going to happen. An example is the Iron Beam. The Iron Beam is going to eventually replace or work alongside the Iron Dome, and it is laser beams that are fired at incoming rockets. So we have the system, it's just not fully worked out and functioning yet and fully tested. So that's why we're not using it in Gaza, even though it would be a tremendous asset in Gaza. but we're not using it because it's not fully supported yet. With some support from nations being pro-Israel and some being anti-Israel, will the UN get involved in the war? No, the United Nations doesn't get involved in war. At most, they're peacekeeping forces. Sometimes the United Nations will force a ceasefire, and maybe that's what you're referring to. The United Nations will take a vote on a ceasefire and put a heavy pressure on a country to create a ceasefire. But as long as the United States is very much pushing that that Israel shouldn't have a ceasefire, the ceasefire will just be in Hamas's favor. So then, as long as that's happening, the United States has a veto on any vote that could cause a ceasefire in the United Nations. So America would just veto it. So would a number of other countries. Okay. Okay. Why did it take a similar question? Why did it take Israel so long to develop to use these new defense systems? How is it possible it missed the drone that came in from Syria? Well, okay. So it took Israel so long to use the new defense systems because we didn't have anything to defend against. We weren't being attacked. So now start using them because the things that they're designed to protect against are now being used by our enemies. So therefore, we're starting to use them. And how we missed the drone from Syria, I don't know. It got through the systems. I'm sure Israel's now recalibrating systems to make sure that we don't lose them. Will the highway that was taken out also affect future resupplying? And if not, are Israel and the U.S. prepared to take down other paths? So I assume that once the highway is destroyed, it's going to be destroyed until it's fixed. And then once it's fixed, it's going to be destroyed again. So I assume that's the process that's happening now. And yes, America and Israel are always willing to take out supply routes for their enemies, for sure. Okay, well, some support from the nations being pro-Israel and some being anti-Israel. Will the UN get involved in the war? I think we just read that. Sorry. Okay. How do diplomatic factors and alliances influence the strategic decisions made by Israel in this time of conflict? Diplomatic factors and alliances. We essentially just got to make sure that America's not upset at us and doesn't act against us and is in support of us. President Biden has pledged his unequivocal support. The president of France promised his unequivocal support, and other countries have come and supported us. So we're in a pretty good, comfortable position now. And Israel doesn't do things, at least not purposefully, that get people upset. Okay. How have the tactics of the Israeli Defense Forces adjusted to the changing nature of warfare in the region? I'm not sure. I think that's only going to be up to studies afterwards to be able to tell what we're doing differently. Okay. Has the UN or any Arab nations or governing bodies shown any willingness to help govern Gaza once Hamas is gone? No. They've both said no. Both the United Nations and Arab countries have said that they will not go into Gaza and will not help govern it. They don't care about Gazans. I mean, this should become abundantly clear to everybody that they don't care, and that they don't want this as their headache. The Palestinians in Gaza are troublesome people. It's just a fact, and they don't want that trouble. There's no benefit to governing Gaza at all. You don't get anything from it, so why would you want to? Has Fatah, for that matter? Yeah, Fatah wants to. The Palestinian Authority wants to because it wants to shut down Hamas and wants more power. So they're the only ones that are willing to do it. But of course, they're completely incompetent and have no ability to do it. What problem specifically does Netanyahu have with UNRWA? So I think I addressed that earlier in the video. How do Israelis feel about UNRWA? Same exact thing. They are an organization that teaches its children to hate. This is well documented. Just a simple Google search will come up with the problems of UNRWA. Okay, that's the end of our video. We should be peace. Our hostages should come home. We should have security and victory very quickly, and all our soldiers should return home safely. Shalom.